And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. A beautiful day today. And we are here on Living in the 21st Century, as I said before. And I have joining me today Dr. Kfoury. She is the founder of the River Consultant, River Educational Consultant, that is. Dr. Kfoury, it's good to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So I recognize we live in a very traumatized world, so to speak. Children is at the apex of endangerment with this COVID-19. One of the things I've recognized is that we have parents who don't want to have their kids vaccinated. That's their prerogative. There are the kids also who believe they should be vaccinated. Some doctors are saying they are too young to get vaccinated. What dangers do you see lurk around situations like these if a kid doesn't get vaccinated? I know there are so many variants going on, including the Delta variant, I think, that now starting to work on kids, not only just here in the US, but in other countries also. What you think psychologically, what impact you think this will have now on kids and parents and the whole domestic setting?
So this is actually an argument that has played out in my home as well, where my 14-year-old really was pro-vaccination, and I was still a little bit hesitant as the research wasn't really available just yet. And it was very similar to the HPV vaccination that children are now being given by their pediatricians. And I think it's every parent's urgency to do the research on what they believe, real research, not just Googling it and figuring out, but to do the scholarly research on what effects that have, the vaccinations have been linked to, what have they not, what are the myths? There is one myth out there that the COVID vaccination causes infertility, which is a real fear for a lot of people around the globe because there was sterilization by chemical injection and still is, as far as the Human Rights Committee is concerned. So I think there's fear of the Tuskegee syphilis project rearing its head in the same way. There is conspiracy about infertility. There's conspiracy about it possibly being linked to other types of cancer and other health concerns. I think for me in my house, personally, my 14-year-old really made a good argument for it. She really wanted to be in school without a mask. She really wanted to be in person. And to have that remain that way. And the school policy, the parents had gotten together, the parent committee had gotten together and decided that it was a request that children who want to be in school have their vaccination. And then those who choose not to have the vaccination, they will have to, attend school still by Zoom until they figure something else out or a different plan. And I do know that some of them were wearing masks up until even the end of their school year, even with vaccination, because they didn't know if the vaccination was efficient. So, as far as my younger child, who's 11, I wonder if there's enough development in their immune system to accept the vaccination. However, if we've already given them the MMR, the mumps and measles rubella shot, and we've given them the polio vaccination, I don't know if this vaccine would be any different than what we've already vaccinated our children with. And I don't think there is enough evidence as far as linking between autism and vaccinations. I think it's actually more environmental. And I think the impact of us not vaccinating our population, it would be more detrimental to the continuation of everyday life pre-COVID than just not encouraging people to be vaccinated, if that makes sense. So I am leaning towards more pro-vaccination for the entire population, but I completely understand the hesitancy and the conspiracies that go around the vaccine, especially because it was produced so quickly, and it was, in essence, there was not a lot of trial and error. There were not a lot of evidence that were tested on a wide basis, and we don't know the longitudinal results just as yet.
Right. One of the things that often bothers me, though, is that we have this global conspiracy. I best put it that way. I think best to put it that way because even Barbados, the country I come from, there are those who believe strongly that because it was so much politically motivated in the first place, that there's something else behind it. They're not taking the vaccine, and now the virus seems to be on the upward side back on that island. And still no one wants to take the vaccines. Now, we know here in the United States that we had more than 500,000 people who would have died from this virus that weren't vaccinated. And if you look on the positive side, hardly any who was vaccinated died from the virus. Could you give a word? I mean, you're not in a medical practitioner position to advise this, but from your psychological training, would you try to convey in the minds of people how imperative or how important it is, either way, what you think, to take a vaccine? It saves lives or limit the potential of dying if you should have a vaccine.
So again, you are correct. Like, I am not a medical doctor. That's not my degree.
Right.
I believe psychologically, I think what the hurdle that governments need to overcome, including in the United States, but especially in your home country, there's a distrust in the government, an extreme distrust. So what I would try to figure out if I, would have an audience in Barbados, for example, I would try to figure a way to see the pros and cons of why every single individual should be vaccinated, out of protection for the survival of the country in and of itself. I think governments are not doing a great job in being transparent. I think they are, but they're just not. We need to have a little bit more than just a fear tactic. We need to have education behind it. How does COVID vaccine really protect from immunity? How does the herding immunity system really work? So I think there's just a lack of information that comes around vaccines that are just not being delivered to the everyday person, and that makes them further distrust. Mm-hmm. So I think it needs to be a little bit more open, a little bit more transparent, a little bit and encouraging, so that there's a follow through with the study. Like, how many people in your town, how many people in your family, how many people in your neighborhood have been vaccinated, and how is that affecting the hospital levels? How is that affecting those who are having respiratory issues, or what quality of life? COVID slows down a person's immune system to where they're having trouble breathing, where they're not able to sleep as well. They're very tired, and they're sleeping, but they're not sleeping as well. So it's not rejuvenating their body. They can't think clearly. Their stomach hurts. So there's all these just different patterns that go along with it. And I would, describe it. If I was a government agent, I would really take my time to really unpack it so that people can have trust in the government themselves and be more apt to be convinced to take the vaccine in order to have the herd immunity and to bring us back to an everyday lifestyle that we had pre-COVID. Because if we don't do this and it continues to spread, and just like other illnesses, just like the flu each year, it's going to be with us forever. I do believe that COVID will be with us in some form or fashion with us forever, but I do want to get a handle on it, especially now that there's other variants out there that seem to be growing stronger. And there could be even more variants, just like every year there might be a new strand of the flu. So for governments, especially, your home country, your government should really convince its citizens by providing transparency and information and clinics and holding them quite often until they have a greater sense of herd immunity and protection.
Great. One thing that bothers me still a little, even back here in the US, is that this surrounds this vaccine. It had been so much political turmoil over it in the past year. And now we still have a lot of those here in the US that haven't been vaccinated. Now, apparently it seems that more kids are now getting infected than adults. And I don't know if this is because more adults now had been vaccinated rather. Now, with kids who are not so much vaccinated, who haven't got the vaccine as yet, and going into schools, I mean, we briefly spoke about it not too long ago. Kids going into school not vaccinated, and it seems that I see a bigger problem behind this, is that we can now have an outbreak within schools of this virus. The kids now take it home to the parents. Now, the reality is the vaccination or the vaccine doesn't give 100% of guarantee that you would become infected all over again. And I heard that those who would have caught the virus before, if they get it the second time, it may be just as detrimental. Do you think that government should call, now in this infancy stage, make it a kind of mandatory that, I mean, this may be unconstitutional, that all kids get a vaccine? I mean, if you go into school as a kid, you have to show your vaccination report that you was vaccinated from different ailments that may pop up in the school. Should this vaccine be made mandatory in the same way that we can avoid having these outbreaks in schools across this nation?
You are correct in that way of, the great country that we are in right now is that we do have constitutional rights. It is an infringement to require all children to be vaccinated if that's not the doctrine of that family. I know there are schools that really do require children to be vaccinated, but I also know, especially in Massachusetts, that there are schools that don't. It puts children at risk, in my personal opinion, but that's my doctrine in my house. So I believe in the vaccination. I don't believe the government will ever be able to demand every single child be vaccinated, but I do think they can limit the rights. Again, like some schools, you are not allowed to enter their building unless you are vaccinated. And you have to show proof of that. So it is a very good constitutional argument that I don't really see which direction would suppress the other. So at this time, I really don't have a definitive answer as to my suggestion. I do, again, caution that when my children were younger and I would take them to a playground and I would worry whether or not other children could be carrying, life-threatening illnesses because their parents were anti-vaxxers. So that, again, is a personal choice in my house. I chose to have them vaccinated. Again, I chose them even to have the HPV vaccine, even without too much longitudinal study. And my current 14-year-old is vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine. So in my house, we are pro-science, we are pro-medical. However, again, like I said, there is so much out there and so much in our history, that for years and years and years, if not decades, that we have a distrust in the medical field or the governmental field. So there will always be an opposition to whether or not making vaccines mandatory.
Okay. So should this problem persist as we see the uptake of this virus again? Would it be wise then that parents who are so superstitious and cautious about this conspiracy theory behind the vaccine, should they consider strongly about homeschooling their kids? Because I don't think it's a wise idea that you should send your child in a school where others may be vaccinated and they are not vaccinated. They may very well have the virus and then pass it to someone else. The question is, should parents strongly consider homeschooling their kids? And if they do, what credentials they have behind their name that tells you they would do a great job in if they was to go to school and being taught by a school teacher?
So, there is that concern too. The adolescents are going into school. They'll probably, I'm guessing in September, they will still have to wear masks if they are not vaccinated, if they're allowed in school at all. My suggestion is then it becomes a question of, do they homeschool or do they Zoom? Do children have the capability of remaining on Zoom while other children are in school, which leaves them really at a loss for social interaction for many of the children that need that. They need even the blocker break or the recess time to play with friends. They need that socialization. I really do encourage parents, to think about the long-term effects of this short-term, this blip in our history, because right now it is considered, it's a very small amount of time, even though it feels like, obviously it's over a year, but we have to consider the psychological impact, the emotional impact, the social impact, the behavioral impact that keeping our children home because we don't believe in the vaccine may have effect. Whether or not you believe in the vaccine, whether or not you don't want to vaccinate your children till later, we still have to consider that there is an impact, positive and negative, as any of our choices are. So for my recommendation, I fear as well, teachers work really hard and there's a lot of training. And in the state of Massachusetts, you have to have a master's within 5 years of being in that field. So you are building the pedagogy, you're building theories, you are building the behavioral implications for your classroom management and whatnot as you go to those courses over the time to receive your bachelor's, then your master's, and then if you choose to go on. There's a lot of training that I think parents have figured out, either positive or negative, that teachers actually do. And I wonder if they have the capability, without having the educational background and the training, to really fulfill and sustain homeschooling for a long term, should they choose not to get their children vaccinated.
One of the other things, too, that I would have recognized during the past coronavirus season, so to speak, is that there was an uptick in domestic violence and kids were exposed to this kind of violence. And I only can imagine the cops are very cautious now in approaching residents, their homes, because of what they may be exposed to in this kind of atmosphere. What would you say to a kid in this time? And I know this is factual, where kids are exposed to domestic violence in a closed-door setting, both mentally, physically, sexually, on just domestic violence from a general standpoint. What would be your advice to kids who may be shut up behind doors simply because of this virus, exposing to this violence? How should they report it? Should they keep it secret? They may be threatened. There's so much that could be going on behind the natural eyes. What advice would you want to say to those kids?
Well, they are much too young to be put in a position just like that because of adult dysregulation. It's a very difficult position, and we are entrusting our children to mature rapidly when they are stuck in a situation of domestic violence, when they have witnessed violence, when they have experienced or been directly affected by it. It adds on to the adverse childhood experiences, which make them more likely to have negative behaviors as they get older. So my caution is always to talk directly to the children, and more so talk directly to the adults, and where the adults need to be able to get a handle on their lives, and they need to be able to figure out what is right and what is wrong, so that they're not affecting and causing intergenerational trauma to continue. What might have happened to you as a younger person you've become the adults that you have now engaged in this behavior, or should you just feel that you're just down on your luck? However, these are little individuals. These are children that we are raising to be the future of our country. And psychologically, they are not equipped to be able to witness and handle and process what we're expecting them to, as far as domestic violence, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, in a whole category of those. The more that we expose our children to these abuses and to these experiences, the least likely their productive outcome is going to be. They will become a victim of the system in addition. So what we need to say, what I tend to say to children is talk about it. Even when somebody is threatening you, you need to talk about it. You need to find one or two trusted adults and go to them without fear of repercussion. It's easy for me to say, as I'm not in that position, but that is what I believe, that we need to seek the help when it's needed. So I encourage children to find the trusted adult, find somebody that they can talk to about what's going on in their home, and let it out so that they are not holding it in and being responsible for that and having literally their brain and their body changing physiologically to adapt to handling the continual stress, where their amygdala is constantly in fight or flight, their brain is constantly ready for trauma or handling how are you going to run away from a situation, and they're analyzing their home, where can they hide when this person is losing their cool. So, and that they will take that with them forever, even if they compartmentalize it and go on to live through high school, go on to live through college or workforce, but it will play out longitudinally speaking down the line, whether or not it's within a relationship, whether or not it's in a working relationship, whether or not it's with their children long-term, should they ever have them. So I encourage, yes, I believe there are organizations that even children can use in their phones that to ask for help. They can talk to an adult, reach out to hotlines that have them. Often in Boston, we have 311. They will transfer that call to the needed party to help that child in need. But you're right. Police officers, they are a good source, but I know a lot of individuals don't trust them. I still encourage, if there is one in your neighborhood, especially those that are around and you've seen them before, stop them and just talk to them, reach out for help.
And so in the event that the nation going to shut down again and kids are isolated and going to school remotely, do you believe that there should be a system set up where there is an assigned social worker to those kids, well, kids as a whole who are now going to school on Zoom, whatever the case may be, that they can always be read some monthly report, a weekly report, or a bi-weekly report where the social worker can question the kids to figure out if there's some form of domestic violence or exposed to this kind of danger going on within their household. Do you think that a social worker should be assigned then to these kids?
I think the tough part about our DCF, our Department of Child and Families, is that they are assigned to individuals that have been reported or have known, and there's just not enough of them. So I really do, idealistically as well, like that sounds brilliant to figure out a clue word as to whether or not they're safe or whether or not they are not safe, that the social worker and the child can come up with. But I do caution that, there needs to be more social workers. We need to hire more psychologists. We need to hire more mental health professionals not only in Boston, but, globally, because
Yes.
we're not meeting the needs of the children. So I do believe that social workers can develop a check-in system. I just don't know how efficient it would be at this moment. But yes, I do believe that there should be a system worked out with the individual child or children children in a home that should there be a lockdown again for COVID reasons, that they would be able to send a message some which way or the other to their social worker that would have that clue word that would let that social worker know that there needs to be an intervention of some sort.
Okay. Well, there's an old saying from where I come from, is that while the grass are growing, the horse is starving. So if there are not so many social workers, then should be the teacher tasked with, just briefly, it doesn't have to be a long, extended period of time. Should the teacher be tasked from time to time checking in with their students to see how they're doing, if there's any problems, and then should there be problems, then they can make the necessary referrals needed. Do you think that may be a good idea?
So what I did observe through COVID the first time, hopefully the only time, was that there were a ton of brilliant teachers that had spent a good portion of their time, even on Zoom, checking in with their children, checking in with the students one-to-one. The use of the breakout room was a great method on Zoom for teachers to just ask them how they're doing, reaching out, letting them know strengths about them, letting them know deficiencies of their work that they were capable of doing from home. But there was a very good, significant social, emotional, behavioral piece that teachers were responsible for, were encouraged to take steps towards. And I believe the majority of teachers, I like to believe, really did spend time checking in and making sure that everybody was safe. And those cases that the children were not safe, I know that teachers are mandated reporters.